Well, when I was a little boy, about 9 or 10 years old, I was visiting an uncle out in Minneapolis, and he had a player piano, and I'd never seen such a thing like that. My gosh, that was the greatest thing I ever heard in my life. So I always wanted one, but my parents, of course, would never permit one in the house. But when I came home from the military service in 1946, I had means of my own, and I went out and bought one and dragged it into the house, and I'm sure my parents didn't go for that too much, especially after my father having paid for music lessons for years for me. But anyway, I got interested in that. And then some years later, when we moved here to Vestal, I learned more about the existence of the infinite variety of mechanical instruments that were on the scene over many years, and I thought it'd be kind of fun to put together a collection. So over the years, we assembled a comprehensive collection which has representative pieces from practically all of the different types of mechanical music machines that have been made. We don't have one of everything, but we got an example of just about everything here in this group. Well, this piano we're looking at right now was made by the American Piano Company under the Knabe label, and this one was actually built in 1935. It's very new as this type of instrument goes. Now, what's unusual about this instrument? Well, if you look at this music roll, you will see that on each edge of the roll there are extra holes. The holes in the middle of the music roll play the notes, and these extra holes on either side control the throttling valves, which determine the level of vacuum that operates in the little new bellows which strike the keys. There's a little bellows about 1 inch wide and 4 inches long for each key on the keyboard. And the trick, of course, is to get that little bellows to collapse and provide the mechanical energy to strike the note. And that, of course, is controlled by the proper holes in the music roll. Now, the force with which the pneumatic collapses is controlled by the level of vacuum, and that in turn is controlled by throttling valves, which in turn are controlled by these little expressions along the side. It's, as I mentioned earlier, it's a very sophisticated technology. Mr. Seberg was a Swedish immigrant who came to this country around the turn of the century. He had learned piano making in his native town of, I think it was Gothenburg in Sweden, and he settled in the Chicago area, set about making piano components, and eventually was, among other entrepreneurs, able to recognize that this new technology of the automatic piano was such a novelty that people would pay to hear them in public places by putting coins in these machines. So machines of this type eventually became quite sophisticated and in terms of the technology of the day, and this is a very good example. This is a so-called Model G orchestrion, and every collector would love to have one of these, but there aren't that many to go around. There are probably, maybe 18 to 24 known to exist in the United States. So we're very fortunate to have this. And basically it's an overgrown glorified player piano is what it amounts to, powered by an electric motor. You can put up to 15 or 20 coins in it, and they have an accumulating device, so it'll keep playing as long as the coins are there to give it credit. And of course, they say Seberg was the first to use stained glass on his pianos. You notice this one has some very attractive stained glass, And when we celebrated the centennial in 1976, we were able to brag about the Liberty torches. And fortunately, when we got this machine about 24 years ago, the glass was intact. And I think this idea of the stained glass on electric pianos sort of carried over into the jukebox age, when we have jukeboxes that were made in the 40s and the 30s and the 40s with elaborate plastics and all that sort of thing. Anything colorful to attract the public. The history of mechanical music is really a very rich and interesting one. The industry that produced mechanical music over the years was a pretty important thing, and sociologically. For example, the player piano was a very important sociological part of our life back around the turn of the century until about 1925. Remember, there was no radio yet. Phonograph didn't amount to anything. If you wanted to make music in your home, you either learned to play an instrument or you didn't hear anything. So when mechanical music was made available to the masses, why, of course, there was a great effort to get this. At that time, the piano was the prominent musical instrument in the home, but many pianos were silent. And the advent of equipment, play them mechanically, was a great boon to mankind in the eyes of many people. And there are plenty of parents who scrimped and saved so that their youngsters could have the benefit of this marvelous new invention, the player piano. Here in the town of Binghamton, city of Binghamton, was a fellow named Ed Link who worked in his father's piano factory back during the teens and the 20s. And he learned the piano making trade. And he was really more interested in aviation than he was player piano and pipe organs, which they also made. And when the firm went bankrupt in about 1927, he transferred his interest to aviation. And he had the idea that learning to fly was expensive. A lot of the training had to be done on the ground if it was ever to be within reach of many people. So Ed Link developed, using player piano parts and airplane components, the famed Link flight trainer. And anybody who's lived through the World War II era who knows anything about aviation knows that they played a very, very significant part in the training of pilots in great numbers for the Allied forces all over the world during World War II. And that it has its outgrowth in this machine, which is built right here in local Binghamton. This particular orchestrion has a xylophone in it and some drums and traps, which you can hear. But the most interesting way for the first-time observer is the way it handles the music. You see, we've got this great big wad of music bunched into this box down at the bottom. What it is a loop of paper about 220 feet long, and there are 15 tunes punched into the music roll. Now, why this clumsy thing? Well, the beauty of it is that the paper always goes one way, and therefore you don't have the complexity of a rewind device. Think of a typewriter. What's the thing that always goes wrong in a typewriter? It's a ribbon rewind, isn't it? Well, with this device, you don't have that problem. Of course, it's a nuisance to change the music roll. And there's a special spool that you use to wind up the music and get it back into a box. But most of these machines were made for route operators. Just as today we would have a commercial firm that owns a bunch of jukeboxes or video games or something like that and puts them out in stores and restaurants and arcades. In those days, there were route operators of electric pianos. And this is the type of thing that they put out on location in those days. Historically, this is interesting to me because it's how an industry, which is a very big industry in this country today, got its start. The Link Company locally employs 3,500 people today. Or something, you know, big numbers like that, with a couple of plants or more plants overseas. And there are other, you know, we do learn everything by flight simulation today. And it has its origins right here. The machine we're looking at here is European in origin. It's a fair organ or a fairground organ, and it's a relative of what most of us in this country would know as a merry-go-round organ. American merry-go-round organs were made mainly to make noise and ballyhoo, whereas the European fair organs tend to be very, very musical. The larger they are, the more musical they are because they have more capabilities with more pipes in them. They're sort of a cousin of the player piano and also a cousin of the pipe organ because most of the sound in them is made with various types of pressure-operated pipes. On this one, for example, these little red ones in the front are piccolos, very bright, very shrill. These gold ones back here on the right and the left are reed pipes. They are made to sound by the vibration of a brass reed, and they're called saxophone pipes. Up in the upper part here, we have 6 big bass notes, which are called trombone pipes. It was typical in the days of these things to have a bandmaster in front. As you can see, this Arturo Toscanini type here in front conducts the music, and the motions of his hands and head are keyed into the music which is fed into the machine. These machines don't play music rolls, at least this particular one doesn't. It plays music in the form of folding cardboard books. And the beauty of these folding cardboard books is that they're very durable, and when one of these machines was in the hands of a carnival operator or an amusement operator, very apt, he was not the type to be a delicate nature and take care of things very carefully, and these machines would stand the kind of abuse that they were apt to get in that type of service. Musically, they're very interesting. There are not too many of them in the United States, but in Europe they're big, big collector's items these days. And many rallies and clubs, organizations, groups to get together and have a lot of fun with these things out in the open. And that's starting to happen in this country too. Let's take a look at what's happening in this violin playing machine. This is a real violin in every respect except one. You notice it doesn't have any tuning pins in it up here on the neck of the violin. These strings are held taut by these hanging weights over here at the left. And that's the way the violin is kept in tune at all times. You know, an ordinary violin won't stay in tune 5 minutes, but with this hanging weight keeping the string under constant tension, they'll stay in tune a long time. Now, the bowing is done not by a bow in the sense that you know a violinist to use one, but it's done by these little rotating wheels, which are comprised of celluloid discs. And someone once said there's a relationship between celluloid and cellulose and horsehair of a violin bow. And that's the secret that made this machine possible. Yeah, if you'll notice that we have a little box up here that has cakes of rosin in it. This machine has a 5-tune music roll, and for every nickel you get 1 tune. At the end, when 5 tunes have been played, the music roll reverses itself, goes back to the beginning, and during the rewind process, this little box drops down and applies rosin to the bows. So it's a self-rosining device. Now, how does it do the fingering? Along the neck of the violin, you will see all these little metal fingers, and they pop up and down, and they have a notch in them. And they are located at the fret points of the violin. And the music roll tells these to come up and down at the appropriate moment to shorten the string, so that when the little bow comes down and touches the string, it's pushed down by an electromagnet, and it'll produce a proper sound. The piano in the back, you notice, has the long strings in the middle. Can you see how the short strings are on either side? That's an interesting technology which provides a mechanically balanced piano structure. And allegedly the thing is supposed to stay in tune a little bit longer, which perhaps it does, but I can assure you it'll drive a piano tuner crazy unless he has a little chart that came along with the machine telling him just how to tune the thing. These are a fascinating machine to watch, and whenever there's a newspaper article about a collection somewhere, or a television crew like yours comes in here to film these things, they always home in on the violin machine because they're so unusual. However, there are at least 1,000 of these machines still in existence around the United States and elsewhere. There are a few overseas. Most of them are right here in the United States. Perhaps because they were electrically operated, they tended to be very durable, they'd last for a long time, and they're so unique, maybe people didn't junk them. They were very, very widely used in Greek candy kitchens back during the 20s. Now, what there is about the Greek people that would make them interested in violino music, I don't know, but they went hand in hand with the typical Greek candy kitchen of the day. And you can tell this from the testimonial letters that the Mills Novelty Company put out in their advertising. Well, back in the days of silent movies, in the very early days, the people in the movie business discovered that the way to keep patrons interested, in addition to having something going on the screen, was to have some music coming out of the orchestra pit. So frequently, they would hire a little old lady or a musician to play a piano. And as the movie business went on, of course, orchestras and later big pipe organs for the giant movie palaces built during the 20s were developed. And this is a whole story all in itself. For small and medium-sized theaters, machines like this were sometimes used. And what this is a player piano to which have been added organ pipes, sound effects, and traps and other things. So a clever operator can sit in front of this, play it, pull these leather cords which hang here, and make noises like pistol shots and bass drum and snare drum and sirens and wind and all that sort of thing. And if you get clever at it, you can cue it pretty well to the antics of a Laurel and Hardy comedy or something like that. these machines also can be played with music rolls. On this particular machine, the music rolls are not scored for the drums and traps, and therefore the operator, if he wants that kind of effect, will have to put them in himself. Some made by other companies were orchestrated and would control some of the drums and traps more or less independently. I'm not aware of any that were specifically scored for specific movies. But so what? If you played the Lord's Prayer during the cowboy chase scene, the patrons didn't care that much. It was a big fun thing of the time, and that's the way it went. But these photoplayers are very rare today. David Bowers, in his Encyclopedia of Automatic Musical Instruments, has estimated that perhaps 6,000 of these things were built during that era, and perhaps 50 exist today. And of the 50 that exist, maybe half of them have been restored back to working condition. We have a lot of fun with this one here. When collectors come and visit, they get a kick out of it because while they have read about the machines, they might not have seen one in person. And I'm probably the only collector of this type of thing who plays one by hand. There may be other people I don't think of, but then, of course, if I'm entertaining some group of senior citizens, they might remember it, and they get a big kick out of it. To someone from the general public who's never seen any of this stuff, the whole thing is kind of a laugh anyway. So it's a fun machine from beginning to end, and it gives me an excuse to watch some of these old silent movies like Laurel and Hardy that are really, really great. And must have been fun playing in those. Well, there's a lot of work playing these things. I can tell you, you play one of these things for a 20-minute silent film, and you put anything into it all, you're kind of fagged out. I don't know how those people did it in the old days when they played for an hour or two at a time. We're fortunate we've been able to build enough room onto our house to display these pieces nicely, and we're active in the hobby groups like the Musical Box Society, and go to the meetings and conventions. And on top of that, now we are full-time in the book publishing business, and we make our living publishing books about all these kinds of things, and that's a lot of fun. And anybody who can make a business that's based on his hobby interest is very fortunate indeed.
The origin of the QRS name is really unknown, but the best story we have is that since QRS was founded as a subsidiary of a player piano manufacturing company, that no provision had been made for piano roll orders. And when they came in, they were put in the Q file of the company mail cabinet, because Q was a seldom used letter and there was plenty of room there. But as orders grew and as the player piano caught on, eventually the orders spilled over into the R slot, which was next door, and then into the S slot, which was next to that. So piano roll orders came to be known as QRS orders. There is a common misconception that only old music is available on piano rolls. But the piano roll is just a medium for popular music. That's all it ever was. So in the 20s, music of the 20s was put on rolls, but in the 30s, music of the 30s was put on rolls, and so forth in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and here in the 80s, we're doing music of the 80s. There's no reason that the medium can't be used for, you know, any type of music. The marking device was really hailed as a step forward in 1912. Prior to that, piano master rolls, or rather master piano rolls, had to be hand-punched directly from sheet music. It was a drafting board operation. The Melville Clark marking piano enabled a pianist to sit down and simply play, and out would come a drawn-out piano roll of his performance. It would then have to be cut by hand and processed. The marking piano has a bank of pneumatics suspended above a drum that is wrapped with carbon paper. Each of the pneumatics has a little metal stylus attached to it, and each of these pneumatics is attached to a single key on the grand piano keyboard that sits behind the machine. Blank piano roll paper is fed between these styli and the carbon drum, hooked onto a take-up spool, and as it passes underneath this row of styli and the pianist plays, carbon marks are produced on the underside of the moving paper. Hand-played rolls are not necessarily superior to arranged rolls at all, because a player piano cannot interpret a live performance. But it did enable the QRS company in its early days to capture some unique sounds that were not recorded elsewhere. The phonograph at that time was not very capable of recording piano, so there are some early ragtime and jazz performances that are you know, just gems of their type. Fats Waller recordings, James P. Johnson recordings, and so forth. Rudy Martin is really an amazing character. What he does is something that no one else, I think, on the planet could do without years and years of training and lots of patience. He takes a piece of sheet music and listens to a pop recording, and then through some mysterious process known only to him, is able to recreate those sounds on a master piano roll. What Rudy does first is sit down at the keyboard and read through the music, listen to the record, and begin to get an idea of the form of the thing. And then he presses down the keys that he wants and presses a foot pedal under the keyboard to advance the master roll the appropriate duration to match rhythmically the notes that he wants cut in. He has to be thinking of about 100 different things at once, so what he's going to do next tells him what levers he's going to have to pull above the keyboard. Really a note and a chord at a time. He starts at the beginning and crawls through the piece. It may take him 8 hours to master a 3-minute song, but it's all, you know, it's a growth. It starts with the first note, and then that gives way to the second note and third note and so on. And there's a continuity at the end of it that you wouldn't believe possible from the slowness of the process. People seem to think that the best way to make a piano roll would be the live recording method, to have a pianist play and to have whatever he plays come out on a piano roll. But the player piano is incapable of reproducing a human performance. And what Rudy can do on his recording piano is really tailor a performance to the player piano's capabilities, and at the same time sort of minimize its liabilities. There's no need for it to sound mechanical or overbearing or unpleasant. He's trying to concoct an arrangement that is balanced, appealing, has some form to it, and this particular machine was developed in about 1931 when live playing was becoming too expensive for the piano roll industry, which was, you know, fighting for its life at that time. And really, it saved the industry, and I think made for the piano roll sound that most people are familiar with. The result of Rudy's work is a primary master roll, a paper master roll. That can then be doctored in any number of ways. If he has decided that the form of the finished roll will have repeated sections in it, he only need record them once on the recording piano, because in the further editing and editing process he can duplicate that section one or more times, and in different keys to give it some variety. Once the primary master has been punched on the recording piano, it's gone over, edited with a little ruler that looks like a keyboard so the holes can be identified, and a grid, a punched grid of paper that tells Rudy where the beats fall. Any corrections that he wishes to make at that point he has to do with a sharp knife, an artist's knife, and Scotch tape. Once he's made those corrections, he'll get a finished production roll from the master machine in his arranging room. That master machine reads the corrected primary master and produces the new finished production master with all the rhythm corrections and note corrections. That master roll, the production master, is then read onto a floppy disk in an Apple computer. The computerization of our process really was sparked by a hobbyist in Michigan who had developed a computer system for his home organ, whereby he could record and it would play back. And we were impressed by it and asked him if he would be interested in developing a perforator control system, an electronic perforator control system for us. And he came here, talked to Rudy and others so that he knew what the machine had to be able to do, and then came up with a computer program to do it. The image that appears on the computer screen is exactly the same as the image that appears on the primary master roll. It may seem incomprehensible to uninitiated people, but to a piano roll worker, those holes are as clear as printed music. So when that passes by on the screen, Rudy can spot errors or decide where he'd like to make changes, and by moving the cursor around, rather than cutting things in with knives and Scotch taping out errors, all he has to do is press keys and he effects those changes. The four-cut perforator previously ran from paper production rolls, but now all we have to do is insert the disc, which has the same data that was on a paper master roll, and that tells the perforator where to punch the holes. There are 4 channels to this perforator, 2 on each side of the central console. Each of these is 16 layers thick with piano roll paper. So we can produce as many as 64 copies of a roll at one time. Behind the perforator are large racks containing big drums of paper. The paper on those racks is wider than the finished roll paper. It's gathered at the front of the rack by pinch rollers, and these create a slack loop in paper before it feeds through some separating racks and finally under the head of the perforator where it is punched. As it's being punched, it's also being trimmed by a pair of knives so that it comes out 11¼ inches, which has been the standard piano roll width since about 1908. Many of the people who work here have worked here for a number of years. Some of them have had family members who work here, and a number of them own player pianos. So there is kind of a familial feeling here. People attend the weddings of each other's offspring and so forth. So it's you know, and it's an anachronistic place, certainly a piano roll factory in these days, but it's not, you know, the people are like any other people, and I think they enjoy being in each other's company every day, which makes it a pleasant place to work. What gave the piano roll industry its biggest boost was the development of sing-along lyrics printed along the edge of the roll. That was about 1916 that all began. And to do it, we have to cut a cloth stencil that is as long as the roll, and the words are placed appropriately so that they appear on the face of the roll as they're being played on the piano. The operators take the rolls one at a time, start them under the printing wheel at the front of the machine, press a foot pedal and flip a switch, and the roll shoots under the drum as the belt rotates with the stencil on it, and shoots the printed roll into a cart in front of the machine. It turns off automatically after one revolution, and the operator then picks up the next roll and does the same operation. We produce our own cardboard cores and plastic flanges, that is the spool ends, and the spoolers will insert the spool assembly in a little device, tape the roll to the spool, press a foot pedal, and wind the roll up like a window shade. They then insert a mail reply card, rubber band the roll, and place it in a box bottom. Then a box top is applied, and a label is applied to the front of the box. The label has been imprinted by a little machine in which we insert a rubber stamp. Not every master roll that was ever made was saved. There are, however, thousands of masters down there that are no longer in production, and it is no longer our policy to destroy master rolls. However, with the conversion to floppy disk, all of the masters in this master room will be able to be stored in a fraction of the space and easily duplicated so that duplicates can be stored off the premises in the event of catastrophe.
Player piano, if you pedal with your feet at a constant rate of speed and constant force, the piano notes all are struck with equal intensity, and that's sort of what makes a player piano sound like a player piano. However, if you vary the force with which you depress the pedals, you can actually make an ordinary player piano sound very, very human indeed. In fact, I have friends who are so clever at it that you would just think there was actually somebody sitting right there and playing. Back in the days when these machines were popular, the piano companies spent enormous amounts of money trying to educate the public to play the player piano artistically. Well, I think they wasted their breath. Most people in an ordinary player piano just get up there and beat on the thing. Bazooka. Well, it seems that the piano industry grew up around, it grew up empirically. Pianos were all developed by men who worked in workshops, and while there's a scientific basis for why pianos sound like they do, most piano design work has been done by, rule of thumb and everything else. The American Piano Company in the 1920s decided that they would hire a scientist to come up with the ultimate in this technology. So they hired a man named Clarence Hickman, who was an expert, just happened to be an expert in demolition work. He was a graduate of, I think it was Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. Set him up in a laboratory in New York City and gave him the assignment of working with the original developer of the Ampico, but to bring out the latest technology of the time. So Dr. Hickman eventually conceived of all of the devices which went into making this Model B Ampico. And his name is well known to the collectors in this field. In fact, we published a book about him at one time. The little-known story is that Dr. Hickman, during World War II, was the man who developed the bazooka, you know, the recoilless rifle. And the whole story of this is told by Dr. Werner von Braun, the late Dr. von Braun, in his book on rocketry. There's 4 pages devoted to Dr. Hickman, and I remember one of the pictures in there is bazooka #1. He's holding, it's got his name written on it. Anyway, that's the relationship to this piano, and what relationship logic there is between mechanical pianos and recoilless rifles, I don't know, except that a smart technician can apply himself to lots of different things. This man also worked with Dr. Goddard in early space rocketry work, and he depicted in the museum in Roswell, New Mexico, where Dr. Goddard did much of his work out in the New Mexico desert. That's just a funny little side issue. You know, there's a story to all this stuff has a story. Doesn't matter whether you're collecting guns or stamps or you're a railroad fan or you're a mechanical music fan, there's a little story to all of it, and that's what sort of makes it interesting. Hey, you know what a close is?
You're tied.
Where'd you put that?
That's okay. Go ahead.
That's a close.
That's a